They said Owen Ashby's son would never speak again. Not the therapists at Sick Kids in Toronto, not the specialists flown in from Montreal, not the child psychiatrist from Vancouver who charged $4,000 an hour and smelled of cedar and expensive regret. They all said the same thing, in different ways, with different degrees of compassion. Selective mutism of this severity, compounded by trauma, compounded by grief. The prognosis was not good. Some children simply close a door inside themselves, and the door stays shut. Owen Ashby didn't accept that. But then, Owen Ashby had never accepted anything he didn't choose. He was the kind of man the financial press described as formidable and the police described as careful. His import and logistics empire stretched from Halifax to Vancouver, with routes that no government audit had ever fully traced. He had a penthouse in Calgary's Beltline district with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Bow River, a compound outside Canmore with security measures that would embarrass a military installation, and a 7-year-old son named Finn who had not said a single word in 11 months. Not since the night his mother died. Brooke Ashby had been killed in a car accident on Deerfoot Trail on a Tuesday evening in October. She'd been coming home from a school fundraiser. Finn had been in the back seat. He'd walked away without a physical scratch. He hadn't spoken since. That was the part Owen Ashby could not fix with money, and it was making him come apart at the seams, quietly, in the way that powerful men fall apart. Not all at once, but in the small hours of the morning when no one was watching. Wren had heard the story before she ever set foot in the Canmore compound. Not the official version, the grieving widower, the traumatized child, the charitable foundation Owen had established in Brooke's name. But the real version, the one that circulated in the specific circles Wren Calloway had spent 2 years trying to disappear from. She hadn't been Wren Calloway in those circles. She'd been Dr. Wren Maguire, lead researcher in pediatric trauma and language recovery at the University of Calgary. She'd had a lab, a team, 2 published papers that had been cited internationally, and a grant from the provincial government that was, until 18 months ago, her entire reason for getting out of bed in the morning. Then the university had conducted an internal review. Someone had flagged anomalies in the grant expenditure reports. Someone had pointed a finger at Wren. The anomalies were real. The money had been moved, the paperwork had been altered. But Wren hadn't done it. She knew exactly who had. She also knew she could not prove it without destroying the career of a man who's on 3 government boards and had the ear of the provincial health minister. So she'd been quietly pushed out. Her research license was suspended pending investigation. The investigation, as these things do when powerful people are involved, proceeded with remarkable slowness. Meanwhile, Wren had a brother, Declan, 23, living with a degenerative nerve condition that required medication she could no longer afford on a barista's salary. She'd applied to the Ashby household as a nanny. On her application, she was Wren Calloway, GD, some community college coursework, 2 years of childcare experience with a family in Cochrane. Clean background, modest references, zero connection to the academic world. If Owen Ashby knew who she really was, she wouldn't be getting a job. She didn't know exactly what she'd be getting, but she'd heard enough about him to know it wouldn't be pleasant. The drive from Calgary to Canmore took just over an hour. The man who picked her up at the Greyhound station in a black Suburban didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, and had the particular stillness of someone trained to be unmemorable. The compound revealed itself gradually. First the perimeter fence through the pines, then the cameras, then the gate that opened silently, like something breathing. The main house was architect-designed timber and glass, built into the mountain slope like it had grown there. Beautiful and cold, the way a perfectly maintained museum is cold. She was shown to a sitting room that smelled of wood smoke and leather. She waited 12 minutes. She knew because she counted. Owen Ashby walked in without knocking at his own door. He was taller than she'd expected. Lean, not broad, in the way of a man whose body was an afterthought, something to be maintained rather than displayed. He wore a grey sweater and dark trousers, nothing remarkable, but there was something in the way he occupied space that made the room feel smaller. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples. He was not yet 40, but the silver suited him. Grief had aged him in the right places. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at balance sheets, quickly, thoroughly, without sentiment. Mrs. Calloway. He sat across from her, not behind a desk, which surprised her. No performance of authority. He didn't need the desk. Mr. Ashby, tell me why you want this position. She had rehearsed the answer. She gave him the rehearsed version, the one about loving children, about finding meaning in caregiving work, about the flexibility suiting her current situation. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. My son doesn't speak, Owen said. His voice was flat, not emotionless. The flatness was a lid. She understood that immediately. I want to be clear about that before you accept the position, because the last 2 caregivers left within 6 weeks. They found it unsettling. I don't find silence unsettling, Ren said. He looked at her then. Really looked, in a way he hadn't before. Why not? Because silence isn't the same as absence, she said, and caught herself. That was too specific, too clinical. She softened it. My brother went through something difficult a few years back. He stopped talking for a while, too. It was his way of holding himself together until he could figure out how to let go. Owen Ashby said nothing for a long moment. The rules, he said finally. You manage Finn's daily routine, meals, school activities from home, outdoor time. You do not take him off the property without explicit approval from me or my head of security, a man named Gerard Pruitt. You do not speak to my associates when they visit. You do not discuss Finn's condition with anyone outside this household. He paused. And you do not tell him his mother is coming back. The last rule landed differently than the others. One of the previous caregivers told him that? Ren asked quietly. She meant well. His jaw tightened. But Finn doesn't need meaning well. He needs the truth, delivered in a way that doesn't break him further. He stood. Mrs. Halvorson will show you to your room. You start tomorrow. It took Ren 3 days to find Finn. Not literally. He was in the house, always in the vicinity of one of the caregiving staff. But finding the real Finn, the one that existed beneath 11 months of silence and the protective shell a grieving child builds, took 3 days. She didn't try to engage him directly. She'd learned that much from her research, even if she couldn't say so. She simply existed near him. She read in the same room. She set up a puzzle on the coffee table and left it half done. She brought her sketchbook. She'd drawn since university, badly but persistently, and left it open on the kitchen counter. On the 3rd day, she was sketching at the kitchen table when she felt eyes on her back. She didn't turn around. I'm drawing a dog, she said conversationally, to no one in particular. It looks more like a bear with an identity crisis. I'm not particularly talented. Nothing. My brother used to say I drew everything like it was melting. He was right. She turned a page. I'm going to try a fish next. Fish are forgiving. They're the smallest sound, not a word. Just a breath that had shape to it. Almost a syllable swallowed before it could become anything. She kept drawing. She did not turn around. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine formed. Finn would appear in whatever room Ren occupied, maintaining a careful distance of at least 4 feet, watching. She talked to him the way she might talk to herself. Casual, rambling without expectation or demand. She told him about Declan. About the time Declan had tried to adopt a raccoon and their mother had screamed for 20 minutes straight. She told him about the lake near her grandmother's house in Nova Scotia, how you could see the bottom even in the deep part on a clear morning. She watched him too, in her peripheral vision, in the way she'd learned to observe without being seen to observe. On the 9th day, she saw it. They were in the sunroom, afternoon light coming through the glass, and Ren was explaining to a houseplant, loudly, affectionately, why it needed to stop dying when she saw Finn's right hand move. He was sitting cross-legged on the window seat, and his hand had been resting on his knee, and he raised his index finger and pointed it toward the window. Not at her, at something outside. A magpie had landed on the deck railing. His finger tracked the bird as it hopped sideways. Ren looked at the bird. She looked at his hand. She looked at the bird again. She felt something lock into place in her chest, something clinical and certain. This was intentional motor response to external stimulus. This was communicative gesture. The neurological pathway from perception to expression was not severed. It was suppressed. It was waiting. Yeah, she said softly. Bossy looking, isn't he? Finn didn't smile, but his finger stayed up until the magpie flew away that night. After Finn was asleep, Ren sat at the small desk in her room and opened her laptop. She was not supposed to have research databases on this laptop. She was not supposed to be Dr. McGuire, but she ran the parameters anyway: spinal trauma, grief-induced selective mutism, motor gesture preservation as prognostic indicator. She pulled up 3 of her own papers without meaning to, and then closed the tabs quickly, her heart hammering. She knew what she was looking at. She'd written her master's thesis on a version of this case. Finn Ashby did not have a closed door. He had a door that was stuck, and the people around him had been so focused on the fact that it wouldn't open that no one had tried to figure out why. The next morning she was in the kitchen when Owen Ashby came in at 6:15, earlier than usual. He was on the phone, half turned toward the window. He looked like he hadn't slept. I don't care what the insurance report says, Craig. The Edmonton facility was flagged in February. If the manifest doesn't match the customs declaration, that's not an accounting error, that's a liability. Get it corrected before Thursday. He hung up. He looked at Ren. Mrs. Calloway. I'll get out of your way. Coffee's already made, he said. You don't have to leave. She stayed, She poured him a cup without asking. Black, she'd observed, and he took it and stood at the window and looked at the mountains, which were doing their uncomplicated, magnificent thing in the early morning light. "He pointed at a bird yesterday," Wren said. Owen turned. "Finn." A magpie landed on the deck and he pointed at it, held his hand up for almost a minute. Owen said nothing. But the coffee mug lowered slightly from his mouth. "I think he's been doing it longer than people have noticed," Wren said carefully. "Small gestures, deliberate ones. He's communicating, Mr. Ashby, just not with words yet. The channel's still there. It's just narrow." Owen set the mug down. He looked at her with an expression that sat somewhere between hope and the specific caution of a man who had been given hope and watched it fail. "The specialists said." "I know what the specialists said." She caught herself again. "I looked into it, after he pointed at the bird. I wanted to understand what I was seeing." She held his gaze. "I think the specialists were looking for the wrong things. Or rather, they stopped looking too soon." Owen Ashby was quiet for a long time. A full breakfast. He hasn't done that in 4 months. It was not a compliment. It was an offering. The closest she understood that this man could come to saying, "I'm watching. I see something different happening. Don't stop. I won't tell him any stories that aren't true," Wren said. "But I'd like to keep going." Owen nodded once. He picked up his phone and walked out of the kitchen, but at the doorway he paused. "You said your brother stopped talking for a while. He didn't turn around. What brought him back?" Wren thought about Declan. About the particular night she'd sat on the floor outside his room for 4 hours and just talked, into the dark, about nothing. About everything. About the lake in Nova Scotia and the raccoon and their mother's scream. He needed someone who wasn't afraid of the quiet, she said. Someone who could just be in it with him, until it wasn't so big anymore. Owen didn't say anything. He left for 3 weeks. Wren lived a double life she told herself wasn't dishonest. By day, she was the nanny, patient, present, quietly attentive to Finn in ways that looked like nothing more than good instincts. By night, she was the researcher she'd been forced to stop being, running through every paper she could access, adapting techniques from her own published work into forms a nanny could plausibly use without raising questions. Art therapy that looked like play. Rhythm exercises disguised as a game with pebbles and a tin can. The particular kind of narrated low-pressure company she'd theorized and then, later, proven created safe cognitive space for suppressed expressive function in traumatized children. She didn't have her equipment. She improvised. On the 14th day, Finn handed her a crayon. Not in response to a request. She hadn't asked for anything. She'd been sitting on the floor of the sunroom sketching her characteristically terrible dog, and Finn had walked in, and he'd gone to the box of art supplies she'd left within his reach, and he'd selected a blue crayon and he'd held it out to her. She took it. "Blue," she said. "Good choice. The bear dog needs a collar." Finn sat down next to her, 4 inches away, not 4 feet. He watched her draw the collar. Then he reached into the crayon box and took out a yellow one. He hesitated. Then, slowly, deliberately, he drew a line on the page, a single yellow line. Wren kept breathing normally through the absolute thundering of her heart. "Nice line," she said. He drew another one on the 19th night. Owen came home at midnight. Wren heard him in the kitchen and found him there standing over the sink, not doing anything, just standing. He'd been in Edmonton for 2 days. His jacket was still on. There were shadows under his eyes that had not been there a week ago. "Finn drew today," she said from the doorway. "A lot. 3 pages. Owen turned. Something moved through his face that he didn't quite contain in time, relief so acute it looked painful. "And he sat with me for almost 2 hours, Wren said. "I think he's getting ready to say something. I don't know when. But the pressure is building in the right direction. He's not holding himself shut anymore. He's gathering." Owen pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. He rubbed his face with both hands. The invincibility of him was simply gone in that moment. He was just a father, 42 hours without proper sleep, terrified and tired. "I'll make tea," Wren said. "I don't drink tea. I know. It's for me. You can have the chair." Something happened in his expression, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He stayed at the table. She made the tea. They sat in the kitchen and she told him about the drawings, about the yellow lines that had slowly turned into something that resembled, if you tilted your head, a bird. "A magpie," Owen said. "Definitely a magpie." He looked at her across the table. "You're not like the other people I've employed for this position," he said. "What were they like?" "Careful," he said. "Professional. They kept their distance because they didn't know how not to." A pause. "You keep your distance differently." Wren felt the observation land somewhere precise. "I'm not keeping distance," she said. "I'm just trying not to crowd him. I wasn't talking about Finn." She looked up. Owen was watching her with an expression she wasn't sure she had the language for. Not the assessing look from their first meeting. something slower than that. She looked back down at her tea. "I should check on Finn. He's asleep," Owen said. Gerard checked at 11. "Then I should probably go to bed." "Probably," Owen agreed. But neither of them moved for another 20 minutes, while the mountains sat outside the glass in their enormous, indifferent darkness, and they talked about nothing in particular, and it was the least lonely Wren had felt in 18 months. The threat came on a Wednesday. Owen was in Calgary for a series of meetings. Gerard Pruitt was managing security at the main gate. Wren was in the art room with Finn when the second guard, a young man named Travers she'd barely interacted with, appeared in the doorway with an expression that wasn't right. "Mrs. Calloway, there's someone at the gate asking for Mr. Ashby. Mr. Ashby isn't here. Can they leave a name?" Travers hesitated. "He says it's about the boy. He says he has documents that Mr. Ashby needs to see," he said. Travers lowered his voice, and something in his tone made the hairs on Wren's arms stand up. "He said if you send him away, the documents go public, that the information they contain would be very interesting to the academic community." The academic community. Wren's mouth went dry. She looked at Finn, who was drawing quietly, unconcerned. "Tell him to wait," she said evenly. "I'll call Mr. Ashby." She stepped into the hallway, dialed Owen's number, and he picked up on the second ring. "Someone is at the gate," she said. "He's asking for you. He mentioned documents. He mentioned," she dropped her voice further, "the academic community." 3 seconds of silence. How long ago? Owen's voice was entirely different from the kitchen table version. It was the voice she imagined creditors heard. And rivals. 5 minutes. Do not go near the gate. Do not let Finn out of the room you're in. Gerard will. I'm leaving now. He arrived in under an hour, which meant he'd been driving at a speed she didn't want to think about. He went directly to the gate. He was inside for 20 minutes. When he came back into the house, Wren was in the art room with Finn, who had fallen asleep on the floor cushion with a crayon still in his hand. Owen looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Wren. "Library," he said quietly. "When he wakes up." The man at the gate was a private investigator. His client, he had said, before Owen persuaded him to be considerably more forthcoming, was Dr. Alan Featherwick. The name meant nothing to Owen. It meant everything to Wren. Featherwick was the university administrator whose override code had been used to alter the grant expenditure reports. Featherwick was the man who had pointed the finger at Wren and watched her career evaporate, and who had, subsequently, spent 18 months hoping she would simply disappear. When Wren had stopped appearing in her usual contexts, her lab, her department, the conference circuit, Featherwick had grown concerned. He'd hired someone to find her. The investigator had found her. He knew she was in the Ashby compound under an assumed name. He had photographs of her with Finn. He also had a file. Owen laid it on the library desk without speaking. Wren opened it. It was her own research printed out, annotated. Her published papers, her grant proposals, her internal communications from the university. Someone had put it together carefully. Someone had read it all. "Your name is Maguire," Owen said. He was standing at the window, which was how she'd first found him. It felt appropriate somehow that they'd come back to this. "Dr. Wren Maguire, you were a researcher at the University of Calgary, yes, and you are currently suspended under investigation for research grant fraud." "Yes." He turned. His face was unreadable. "Did you do it?" "No, Featherwick did it. Yes. You couldn't prove it, not without evidence I didn't have." Owen was quiet. He looked at the file on the desk, then at her. "Why my house?" he asked. "Why Finn?" Wren thought about how to answer that and decided the only version worth giving was the true one. "I needed work that no one would trace back to my real name, and when I found out about Finn," she gestured toward the file, "you can see from my research what I study, what I've spent 10 years on. I looked at the description in the position listing and I thought..." She stopped. "I thought I could help him. Even if I couldn't say how I knew I could." She had the same sensation she'd had at their first meeting, being read quickly and thoroughly. But this time there was something else behind it, something she couldn't name and didn't try to. "The investigator brought copies," Owen said. "He claims his client has more. Featherwick wants me to disappear again," Wren said. "If he reveals who I am, it draws attention back to the investigation, to him. That's his problem," Owen said. His voice was very quiet. "Sit down," she sat. He picked up his phone. He called someone named Craig, and the conversation lasted 3 minutes, and involved several phrases Wren didn't fully understand, and at least 2 that she was fairly sure were not entirely legal. When he hung up, he looked at her. "I have a contact at the office of the Auditor General," he said. "I also have a forensic accountant who has been known to find things that other forensic accountants miss." He paused. "The digital trail exists, Miss Maguire. People like Featherwick don't falsify records cleanly. They're confident, not thorough. I've encountered the type. A beat. How quickly do you want your name back? Wren stared at him. Why would you? Because you have been in my house for 3 weeks, Owen said, and in that time my son has drawn 47 pictures, gained 2 kilograms, and slept through the night 11 consecutive times. Before you arrived, he hadn't done any of those things, not once. He held her gaze. The Ashbys pay their debts, Dr. Maguire. Wren felt something crack open in her chest, the kind of crack that lets light in, not the kind that destroys. There's something else, she said, about Finn. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from the researcher, not the nanny. He nodded once. His mutism is not permanent. I'm certain of it. The gestural communication he's been showing me, the pointing, the drawing, the physical proximity, these are all precursors. He's been building towards something. I think we're close. She leaned forward. But the thing he needs most right now is not an intervention or a therapy protocol. It's the one thing he lost. He needs to feel safe enough to say something and know the world won't collapse when he does. He needs to trust that the people who love him are still there. Owen looked at his hands on the desk. I've been there, he said, very quietly. I've been there every day. I know. She hesitated, but he needs to see you be afraid and survive it. He saw you the night his mother died, Mr. Ashby. He saw your face in that moment, and he's been very quiet about what that meant. The silence that followed was the longest of any silence she'd sat in with Owen Ashby. And she'd sat in several. What do I do? He asked. The question had no executive authority in it at all. Talk to him, Wren said. Not about grief, not about his mother, not yet. Just be with him the way I've been with him. Let him lead. And when you're ready, tell him that it's all right to be scared. That you're scared too. That being scared doesn't mean anything is broken. Owen nodded slowly. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who didn't know what came next. She found it, unexpectedly and inconveniently, the most disarming thing she'd ever seen. I'll handle Featherwick, he said. You handle Finn. 2 weeks later, the auditor's report landed with the force of something much heavier than paper. Featherwick's override codes, traced across 14 months of expenditure reports. A payment from a government health ministry consultant to a numbered account traceable, with the right tools, back to Featherwick himself. The investigators moved quickly once they had somewhere to move toward. The university's public statement was brief, carefully worded, and completely unsatisfying to Wren, who had been expecting the satisfaction of vindication and received instead the mild, anticlimactic confirmation that yes, she had been telling the truth all along. But her license was reinstated, her record was expunged. She was, as of a Thursday morning in late March, Dr. Wren Maguire again. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter on her phone screen and felt mostly just tired. Owen came in at 8:30 and poured coffee without looking at her. Then he looked at her. You can go back, he said. I know. The university will want you back. Or somewhere will. I know. He set his mug down. He looked at her the way he had across the kitchen table several weeks ago, that slow, deliberate look that had nothing to do with assessment and everything to do with something she was still not naming. Finn isn't finished, she said. No, Owen agreed. He isn't. He picked up his mug again. The position is still open if the candidate is interested. The position, she looked up at him. The pay is still terrible, Owen said. The hours are unreasonable. The boss is difficult and the commute is non-existent, which some people find unsettling. He held her gaze. And I'm told there will eventually be a teenager to deal with. Wren laughed. It came out before she could moderate it. A real laugh, the undignified kind. Owen looked startled, and then something in his face softened in a way that rearranged her understanding of his face entirely. I'm staying, she said. Good. It happened on a Sunday morning, 5 weeks after Featherwick's case had been handed to the Crown. Wren was in the kitchen, making French toast. Finn had recently developed a strong and clearly communicated preference for French toast, communicated through the method of standing directly next to the bread bag at breakfast time. And Owen was at the table reading the news on his tablet, and Finn was on the window seat watching the feeders outside, where a magpie had established what appeared to be permanent residency. The house was quiet in the particular way it had become quiet over the past months. Not empty, but full of comfortable things. The smell of butter in a hot pan, the sound of Owen turning a page, the mountain light coming through the glass at its early morning angle. Finn slid off the window seat. He walked to the kitchen. He stood next to Wren, watching the French toast in the pan. She handed him the spatula. He took it. He watched the toast for a moment. He flipped it, badly, but successfully. Then he looked up at her. It's going to burn, he said. His voice was small and rusty with 11 months of disuse, like something that needed a moment to remember how to work. But it was his voice. Real and particular and his, and the words were entirely correct, because the French toast was in fact beginning to catch. Wren took the pan off the heat. She did not cry. She had decided, some weeks ago, that if this happened, she was not going to make it large and frightening, because that was the thing most likely to close the door again. She took the pan off the heat and she said, "You're right, good catch." And she handed him the plate, and she did not look at Owen because she could not look at Owen and also keep breathing at the same rate. But she heard him. The sound he made was almost nothing, an exhale quickly controlled, and then the sound of a chair pushed back from a table, and his footsteps across the kitchen, and then Owen Ashby was on his knees on the kitchen floor, his arms around his son, his face pressed into the boy's dark hair. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Finn stood very still for a moment. Then, slowly, he put the hand not holding the plate on the back of his father's neck. Wren turned to face the window. She looked at the mountains, she counted to 30, and concentrated very hard on the way the light was doing something beautiful to the snow on the upper ridge. When she turned back, Owen was standing, one still hand on Finn's shoulder, his face composed in the way she had come to understand was not coldness but the very particular effort of a man who felt things deeply and had spent a long time believing he wasn't allowed to. He looked at her. His eyes were wet. "French toast cold," Finn said. "Then we'll make more," Owen said. His voice was steady, almost. He stood at the stove with his son, and they made more French toast, and Wren sat at the table and drank her coffee and watched, and the magpie outside knocked against the feeder with supreme indifference to the significance of any of it. 6 months later, the Canmore compound was not a compound anymore, or at least it didn't feel like one. The gate was still there, the security cameras still tracked their slow, patient arcs, but somewhere between March and September, the quality of the air inside the fence had changed. Something had released. Finn was in grade 3 at a school in Canmore. He talked. He talked about dinosaurs and rocks and the specific unfairness of the provincial math curriculum. And a boy in his class named Leo, who was his best friend and also, in Finn's considered opinion, terrible at soccer. He talked to Wren on the drive to school and to Owen at dinner, and occasionally, unexpectedly, in the middle of the night, by showing up at one of their doors because he'd had a dream he wanted to describe while it was still fresh. He did not talk about his mother yet. That was still coming. Wren knew it and Owen knew it, and they'd agreed, without making a formal agreement, to simply be ready for when it did. Wren had turned down the University of Calgary's offer to reinstate her research position. She'd accepted a consulting arrangement with a children's hospital in Calgary that gave her 2 days a week of clinical work and left the rest of her time her own. She was also, quietly, writing up the methodology she'd developed with Finn. Not naming him, not naming any of it by anything that could be traced, into what she suspected was the most important paper she'd ever written. Declan was doing better. His medication was covered now. He'd moved to Banff, gotten a job at a gear shop, adopted a dog that was not a raccoon. On an evening in late September, Owen found her on the back deck watching the light fail over the mountains. He handed her a glass of wine and sat in the chair beside her without preamble, which was simply how he moved through space now, or at least through the space that contained her. "Finn asked me something today," he said. She waited. "He asked if you were going to be here forever." She looked at him sidelong. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know." Owen looked at the mountains, which is true. "I don't know." He paused, "but I also told him I was working on it." She looked at him fully. He looked back. "That was a bit presumptuous," she said. "Yes," Owen agreed. "It was." He reached across the space between the chairs and put his hand over hers on the armrest. She did not move her hand. Below the deck, from the open window of the kitchen, they could hear Finn explaining something at length and volume to the magpie, which had taken to landing on the window ledge at dusk. Whether the magpie was listening was unclear. Whether it mattered was beside the point. The mountains held their positions. The light went slowly. The world did not end, and in the particular silence that came after all the noise of a difficult year, something began. Quietly, without announcement, the way the best things usually do.